Hello and welcome. I'm Carol Cram, host of the Art and Fiction podcast. This episode features Stephanie Cowell, author of The Man in the Stone Cottage, a novel of the Brontë Sisters, listed in the literature category on Art in Fiction. Stephanie Cowell is the author of several best-selling novels inspired by the arts, including The Boy in the Rain, Claude and Camille, Marrying Mozart, and her latest novel, The Man in the Stone Cottage, a novel of the Brontë Sisters. Stephanie is the recipient of numerous awards, including an American Book Award for Excellence in Literature. Welcome to the Art in Fiction podcast, Stephanie.
Thank you so much for having me, Carol. I'm thrilled.
I was blown away by The Man in the Stone Cottage. It truly is a masterwork. So you've written novels inspired by Monet, Mozart, and Shakespeare, among others. So what inspired you to write a novel about the Brontë sisters?
It kind of just came. I mean, when I was a young girl, like all young girls, I found the Brontë novels. And I remember I was 14 years old and staying in a little kind of cottage by the sea. I could hear the sea. And I brought Wuthering Heights and I opened it up and I read it into the deep part of the night. Everybody else was asleep. And when I finished it, I was like stunned and I turned to the front page and read it again. And then I fell with love with Jane. So they've always been with me. I've studied them a little bit and I'm not sure. It's lost in time how I decided to do a novel about them. I think it was in 2008 that I decided to do it, and my then editor and agent said, "Oh, no, not that." And so I did a bit, and it was all Charlotte's point of view. But I've always read about the Brontes, and I visited their house 3 times, stayed in the town. It's been just a lifelong journey.
There's been quite a few novels written about the Brontë sisters. So how did you find a kind of a new angle?
Well, I don't even know if I was looking for a new angle, but as I said, first it was from Charlotte's point of view, and it just really didn't go anywhere. I tried it a couple of ways, and then I decided to do it from both the sisters' point of view. And I really don't remember this because I do so much rewriting, but this man came into the picture who lives in a stone cottage in the moor. He's a shepherd. And Emily finds him one day. She took long walks on the moor almost every day, and nobody knew quite where she went. And when she was a child, she used to go and she found this ruined stone cottage, and she would play in it when she was 12 years old. And so she grows up. And one day when she's, I think, 27 or something like that, she goes wandering again, and she finds a lamb, which will lead her to the shepherd, which will lead her to the cottage. And as the book began to grow and change as it does of its own accord, I sometimes feel like I receive things rather than write them. He became a little more amorphous, and the cottage became a little more amorphous. And so when I finally left it, he is so terribly real, and yet in a way so possibly not entirely real.
Well, then that's what I enjoyed so much about the novel, this tension between, like, did he actually exist or is he a figment of her imagination? We don't know.
I wondered why I didn't know. And of course I can't know because I'm doing it through Emily's eyes. Absolutely. I'm always asked that. My first book reading, as a matter of fact, during the Q&A was pretty much all about that. And I can't give it. I say both. He's both. And people say both.
This is why we love historical fiction, right? Because
I do.
It's fiction.
Jonathan just came and he grew. I was terribly interested in the island of St. Kilda's at that time. I'd studied a lot about the farthest Scottish island out into the ocean, very barren, now no longer habitated by regular people, some military, I think they're very, very fascinated. And that went into another novel, and then it kind of morphed into this novel. And this, I don't know if I write, I morph.
I totally get it. Yes.
You, yeah. And
if we could explain it, it would be so much easier. But
yeah. But I can't explain it. Eunice, yes, I read this review. Someone did a wonderful review of it the other day, and I read the review, and I said, "Oh my gosh, somebody finally explained it to me." What I did, they explained my process to me because I didn't know.
No, I don't think we do know. And of course, a lot of the novel is about the creative process, how the women wrote their novels and the struggles that they had. Actually, one thing I loved is Charlotte muses that she's got everything she's ever wanted. and now she can't write. And I was wondering, it was very poetic, that part that you were sort of channeling Charlotte and what her feelings were. If that relates to your own life as an author, when things get good in our lives, sometimes it's not so easy to write. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that a certain amount is born out of struggle. When I started to write, I had the proverbial full-time job and
Yeah.
raising a single mom and up at 6 in the morning to write. And of course, I was in my 30s and 40s. I had lots and lots of energy. So I managed to do that. And I wanted to do it so much. And now that I'm retired from any kind of office job, well, no, I think it's still there. But sometimes the writing is starting to sort of push through me again in that way, in which is something that rises up in me and says, you must leave the dishes, leave the laundry, leave the groceries, right? And so,
Have that, do we? I mean, we think that we should have that, but you don't in life. I know I've been experiencing that. And just lately with my newest novel, I'm like, oh, I can hardly wait to get up in the morning to work on it. But it's not always that way, is it?
no, it's not. It's not. I think things change in life, and you change as you go on. I think people who have very, very, very big successes right off, like Harper Lee and To Kill a Mockingbird, sometimes they don't ever write again because
Oh,
the pressure to live up, you know, and the thing is, the first novel that is so brilliant, they kind of just found it by trial and error. And you have to find it again. You have to kind of do this trial and error thing. Just because you
yes.
do it once doesn't mean it's going to be a piece of cake, unless
No,
you're doing formulaic writing. So
I know. I always think it should be getting easier. I'm on the seventh, but it doesn't actually.
you won the seventh. This was my seventh, so I'm just one ahead
Oh,
of you.
oh, fantastic. Well, it's amazing. It really is a tour de force. So I want to talk a little bit about Emily Bronte, because she's the most sort of enigmatic of the three sisters, isn't she? What is it about her? She wrote Wuthering Heights, of course, that so fascinates us.
One thing I learned when I was writing is that she was a very, very good cook. And she was known as the best baker in the village, which you never think of Emily Bronte as the best baker in the village, but and she also kept the accounts and invested the money of the family. So she had, as most of us do, many sides of her. But basically, all she wanted to do was stay at home. I mean, considering the fact that her mom died so young, she was probably about 5 when her mom died. Her two elder sisters died at age 11 and 12. And I think she had a great need to preserve what she had and knew she wanted to stay home. So she stayed home and wrote these phenomenal poems, which she did not want to publish. She had to be persuaded. She lived very much in a world of imagination. She made up with her sisters, and she kept the house. And I think she must have had an incredibly interesting mind in which the moors lived and the winds lived. And there's one point where she remembers as a child being in this huge storm, and their nursemaid barely got them back home. The storm was so bad. And she thought, gee, if the world had ended, that would have been interesting. It was really interesting to work with Emily because she came through me much more than Charlotte actually came through me. I wasn't conscious of all these strange things came to me, her thought processes when I was writing Emily as she came to me. All historic figures that we novelists write about come to each different author differently. You
Yes.
receive it differently. And she just came.
I was very captivated by her. So the novel's so poetic, so beautifully written. I feel you were influenced by the writing of the Bronte sisters as you were writing.
I wasn't aware that I was at all, but
Oh, okay.
someone said to me, she's channeling the sisters. I said, really? Because I've heard it said, maybe you heard it also, Carol, that the author is the least expert on a book, because it just kind of comes through. And sometimes I read the reviews and I say, what? I did what? And someone just based a whole review on a little section that I wrote, and I sort of haven't thought about much since then. And this became the center of the book for her, which was like, what? But that's great.
I know that's interesting, is it? I'm finding that now as reviews are starting to come in for my new novel. Oh, really? I wrote that? Wow. 'Cause I think you're so wrapped up in the writing of the novel and all the technical stuff and just, making sure you're structuring it well and all the
Yeah.
words that you kind of lose sight of the big picture. So it's pretty heartening when your readers are touched, like I was when I read your novel.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's sometimes I generally don't reread things once they're published, but I remember I did reread an early novel of mine, and I said to myself, I'm sorry I wrote this, because if somebody else had written it, I could say how marvelous I think it is. But as I wrote it, all I can think about is, why did you use that word? Why did you use that verb? You use that verb twice on that page,
Yeah, right. All you
This
can
is
see
very,
are all your flaws.
it's
I know.
hard. So, but once I had the grace to actually sit down and read something and say, well, I did that, and you don't know how things are going to come together. Really, you do your best, but
Yeah.
I find it affects every reader slightly differently according to where they are in life, where they
And we
are in
can
life.
never know that. I guess that's the endless joy that we get out of doing this.
Or sometimes that your reader will occasionally disagree with what you've written and how you've written it, and wish you'd done it otherwise. And
Oh
that, of
yeah.
course, is always not very happy to hear. But I try to say, well, especially if you write about historical figures, people have their own ideas, their interpretations of them. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I read that you spent time in Haworth while researching the novel, at
I
the
did.
house where they lived. That must have been wonderful. I've still never been there. I
Oh
have lived in England
no.
for 4 years. I've been to
When did you
Yorkshire
live
many
in England,
times.
Carol?
Years ago, I went to university in England and studied English literature, but I never made it to the Brontes place. It's on the list.
On the
Maybe
list.
next year when I go again. But tell us about how being in that location where the novel is set helped you.
It's a lot cleaner. It was quite dirty, and the water was full of germs and caused all kinds of illnesses in people. So that was back when they didn't know those things in the 19th century. But it's an amazing. There's one main street, because of the village is rather steep, and you mount up the street. From the bottom of the street, it takes maybe 4 minutes, and then you turn through these gates and you walk past the church, their father's church, which is there, and to the house. It's a little bigger now than it was then, but it's absolutely amazing. I went, as a young woman of 23. I went to England on my own, and I took this very smelly, rickety old bus up from London, and there was a million bumps in the road. And it was just, it was amazing. And I went there, and I had friends, and they took me out on the moors, and I ruined my shoes because I didn't have any walking shoes. I didn't know. It was very, very thrilling. I went a few times, and the last time I went, I arrived there just as it was getting a little bit dark. And of course, my hotel, beautiful hotel, was at the bottom of the road. So, of course, I couldn't stay away. Even the house was closed. The parsonage where they lived was closed. I walked through the gates, and if anyone's seen a picture of it, is pretty much surrounded on a few sides by a graveyard, as it was when they were children. They looked out at that graveyard, and there it is now. And so I walked into the graveyard, and the magpies were cawing in the trees, and darkness was falling behind the trees. And I said, this is a stage set. It can't be, but it absolutely is real. And down at the bottom of the house, of the little path to the house, is the inn where their brother used to go and get drunk all the
Yes.
time. Big bill. So it's all there, and you go in, you feel the sisters, you feel them coming down the hall. It's all small. You feel them walking into the rooms. It's very amazing. It's very amazing, and it's all
Yes.
real.
Yeah, I know it's wonderful that it's been preserved, that it didn't get bought up and turned
Well,
into
there's a whole
condos.
wonderful long story about that, which is quite marvelous. It started well over 100 years ago, that people started to realize that they wanted something to belong to the sisters. And then, of course, everything got scattered all over the world. And the curators at the Parsonage Museum are still bringing stuff back, locating stuff. This table, which was in private hands for 100 years, and they finally located it. And that was the table. It has an E carved in it for Emily. And they bought it and they brought it back. So curators have been doing this for 100 years. It's amazing. Amazing. love, the interest people have had in these sisters who did not live very long, unfortunately.
No, they sure didn't. I actually forgotten how young they were. I was just at the National Portrait Gallery not all that long ago and saw Bramwell's portrait of them, of the three
Did
sisters
you?
with him painted out.
Yes.
That's a great piece. Yeah.
And you know
And
why it's all wrinkled like that? It's wrinkled like that because when Charlotte died, quite young, she was 39, and when her husband went back to Ireland, where he was from, he took a bunch of things, including that picture, and didn't know what to do with it, so folded it up in the closet. And when he died, his second wife found it. So what's this thing rolled up in the closet, you know? And you notice the picture is worn away in the spots where it was folded. It must have been folded in a damp country.
it's very touching to see that because it's just so real, the story behind it. So, what would you say is the theme of The Man in the Stone Cottage?
I mean, the devotion of sisters is a wonderful theme, but I think that what I would say is the main theme is that we all create in some way the person we love. And we might create him from a dream, and he's really real. Or in Charlotte's case, Charlotte was in love with two men who were not worth her, were not worthy of her in any way, but they were educated, they were splendid, they were beautifully dressed. They were Mr. Rochester in a way. One was her French professor, and one was her publisher. And she imbued these men as being really better than they were, but she needed a place to put her romantic feelings. And Emily, of course, we don't know how much Jonathan is just a hardworking shepherd or how much Jonathan is part of Emily's longing and imagination and great creative force, which will partially change the Heathcliff. We don't know, but I do feel that since they were so sort of shut off from the world and shut off from the sort of companionship that someone of their intellect would have, that they did imbue people with maybe more than they had men. Is that strange? Is that a strange theme? Did you think I'd say something else, Carol?
No, not at all. I never know what's going to come up when I ask that question. I think that's an interesting take on it, that we do create in some way the person we want to love, even if it's not in reality. I like that. So, one of my goals on the Art and Fiction podcast is to inspire other writers. So, what is one thing you learned from writing this novel that you didn't know before?
Well, the thing I never know when I try to write a novel is whether I can do it.
Yes.
You know, you just really don't know. If you've got everything all plotted and planned, it's not going to really be alive. But the other thing is what I have, and you don't know what's going to come out. I have a lot of novels that have not quite worked. What did I learn? Well, it seems it's something I wasn't sure at all I could do. I gave up on several times. Actually ended up, for some people anyway, working very nicely, which is something I learned. I really didn't know at one point if I could get this together the way I wanted to do it, with the narration between Emily and Charlotte. And then, of course, there's the big problem that Emily, who is really, I don't know, some people feel Charlotte's the main character, some people feel Emily's the main character. But however, Emily dies before Charlotte. So she dies before the end of that. That she dies is not a spoiler to anyone, I hope. No. And so I didn't know quite how I could do it. I couldn't do it with one. I didn't know if I could do it with two. It's just an experiment for me. I wish I knew more. It's just an experiment. And if I just let myself go, then sometimes something happens that leads to something else.
I understand what you're talking about. It is a mysterious process.
The famous writer, I can't remember which one, who said, there are 3 rules in writing a novel. Unfortunately, nobody knows what they are.
Who said that? I can't remember who said that.
It was one of the people who wrote about 1920. I can't remember which one. It might have been Somerset Maugham.
It sounds like it might be Somerset Maugham. It is kind of the witty kind of thing that he would say. Can you share with us what you're working on now? Do you have a new one in the mix?
Well, I've actually not written a lot in the past 2-3 months, which is unusual for me. I was writing The Man in the Stone Cottage in the 4 months before The Boy in the Rain came out. So this is unusual. And so I made a little list. I'm a great list maker of the novels and books I'd like to finish. And there were 8. And I calculate how long it takes me to do a book, though I very much hope to be writing at the age of 120. I don't know. I can't bank on that. So I'm not sure. It's probably going to be between 2 books. And we'll find out if that changes tomorrow. Because sometimes part of a book will suddenly leap and enter another book. And that will be the answer to the other book. So I've got these leaping things. The one I've been working on for about, golly, probably 25 or 30 years, which I've never quite felt it kind of worked, but now I think it does work. And it's about the last days of the Library of Alexandria and their last great teacher, who was a wonderful astronomer called Hypatia, and her fighting for justice in the world, tolerance in the world, everything personified by this great, great library that somehow she inherits to be the director. I did a huge amount of work on that. And then I'd really, really like to do a sequel to The Boy in the Rain, because I know I leave them. Well, I can't say that, it'll be a spoiler, that I'd like to do a sequel to The Boy in the Rain. I'll be just doing the dishes, or I'll be waking up from a night's sleep, and all of a sudden, these voices will start talking to me, and they'll say something like, I told you not to give him that. Why did you give him that? I don't know. I thought I should give him that. Or something ridiculous like that. Or, I've decided to want to write a novel, whatever. But these voices will start, and I'll stumble to the computer, and because I can't read my handwriting, and try to get something down. And sometimes the typing is so bad because I'm asleep that it just comes. So, the character comes in. The one before this, The Boy in the Rain, the characters just came and kind of shook me and said, write me, and it just was like amazing. And I didn't think it was going to happen again, but apparently it's happening. We'll find out. And there's a bunch of other ones that I should do and want to do. And I hope I live a long, productive time. I do.
Well, you're an inspiration because you just keep working.
Well, it's the thing I love to do most. I mean, outside of my family and my friends, or the center of my life, I love them so, so much. And it's writing for me, and also other people's writing. I love to be what I call in a community of writers. I love to be a writer among writers and get excited about other people. And this is in their journeys. And it's just very, very exciting for me. How I used to be in a writers group, and I'd be astonished that I still am absolutely astonished when I go to a convention or something, how many different ideas everybody has. Some people say, I'm writing about artists in 1920s Paris. And the other person will say, I'm writing about 8th century Scotland. And this is, for these perfectly normal people, and you ask them what they love and what they're doing, and you get this gush of 8th century Scotland or whatever it happens to be. It's marvelous. I love it.
That's true. The community is something I had not expected when I started actually publishing my writing, was to join this community. This is why I do the podcast, because I get to hang out with other authors. So thank you so much, Stephanie. This has been a great conversation. I've been speaking with Stephanie Cowell, author of The Man in the Stone Cottage, a novel of the Brontë Sisters, listed in the literature category on Art and Fiction at www.artandfiction.com. Be sure to check the show notes for a link to Stephanie's website at www.stephaniecowell.com. If you are enjoying the Art and Fiction podcast, please help us keep the lights on by making a donation to the Ko-fi website at kofi.com/artinfiction. Also, please follow Art and Fiction on Facebook and Instagram, and don't forget to give the Art and Fiction podcast a positive review or rating wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much for listening.